So, good day everyone. I am Adrian Sombrado and I am your lecturer for today. In the module 1, I will discuss to you the first is the global view in prisons administration. Second is antiquity to modernity. Third is the influence of human Catholic. Fourth is the Pope John Paul II, the Profile Pope. The fifth is Walnut Street Jail, and lastly, the sixth is the King Henry VIII Edward the sixth, a jewel of King Henry VIII. So we will start the first discussion, which is the global view on prison administration. In 2018, out of the 21 Asian countries, the Philippines was held the sixth highest prison. So, as we can see on the picture, that the Philippines is a lot of criminal prisoner on the jail because of they commit such crime, just like a murder, theft, rape, and others. And commonly, drugs is one of the problem of the Philippines. Why? Because drugs can affect our brain, and because of drugs, there are a lot of killings, and some of them are missing. So the next is in the 2019, the Philippine population rested at 108.31 million people. 215,000 the people who are incarcerated. 933 prisons running in the Philippines. Unfortunately, they are mismanaged and overcrowded. There are the 5 facts about the Philippine incarceration system. So the first is the severe overcrowding is a prisons lead to illness and death tolls in the thousands. Way back on the 2016, where the Duterte running on the presidential election. So he promised that he kill or he arrest the drug addiction, drug dealers. So the severe overcrowding, the Duterte promised to end crime within 6 months. So way back on the 2016, the presidential elections where the Duterte run for the president. So, and then after the election, Duterte was elected for the president. So their promise is to arrest or to kill the drug addicts or drug dealers. So now for now, the their promise is will happen. So there are a lot of the drugs addicts can kill or arrest in the jail, and some of them are missing. And because of the drugs can arrested, this severe overcrowding in prisons leads to illness and death tolls in the thousands. So because of the drugs, can drug addicts or the drug dealers will arrested on the jail, so that there are a lot of prisons that on the jail, so that they can do their self to be free, because he or he is in prison. Two is the pre-trial detainees. So according to the World Prisons Brief, 75.1% of incarceration system are pre-trial. So in 2018, 141,420 of 188,278 prisoners were the pretrial detainees. Unfortunately, many people are serving sentences without conviction. Pretrial detention is found in judicial system all over the world. In the countries like the Philippines, people may serve time that outweighs their crimes. On average, prisoners in the Philippines are detained for 9 months without being sentenced. The high death tolls. So, about 5,200 inmates die annually, and the New Bilibid prison. So, this will happen. There are a lot of inmates can die in the Bilibid prison. We don't know why, but some of them is punished. Fortunately, the according to Ernesto Tamayo, the hospital medical chief, their deaths are due to overcrowding, dirty living condition, in inmate violence. So there are dirty living condition, and at the 2019 the Philippine Senate hearing, Tamayo said that there were uncontrollable outbreaks of pulmonary tuberculosis, in addition of or overcrowding, poor living condition, and inmates violation. NBP lacks nutritional food and basic health care on account of this living condition. Tamayo reports that at least one prisoner dies at NBP each day. Thankfully, politicians and prisons employees are working to reduce overcrowding in the Philippine prison. Human rights advocates have also called for the release of vulnerable inmates, hoping to protect them from poor living conditions. So, the high death tolls. we all know that people are know that fair and unfair. For just like for example that there are two person, rich and the poor. So the poor can't pay because he or she didn't have a money, but the rich is they can't they have a lot of money in order um, to pay their violation. Some others are hired for their um, cookers in order to feed him or her, and also they hired a doctor when in case of um, their sickness. So, in addition to overcrowding, poor living condition, and inmate violation, so the NBP lack of nutritional food and basic health care. Human rights advocates have also called for the release of vulnerable inmates, hoping to protect them for or from living conditions. So, in the 4, vigilante justice. Duterte's war on drugs escalated during his presidency. So, Duterte was hired a people has not worked. So we can see the people who does not have any work were recruited as vigilant killer. Wow. These the people were not have a work. They apply as a vigilant in order to earn a money or to help their families, to feed their families, or to help to school um, their children. Duterte told the public, if you know of any addicts, go ahead and kill them yourself. Together, the Philippine Police Force and unidentified gunmen have killed 7,000 known drug dealers and the users since Duterte's presidency in 2006. So, these are no, it's not 2006 but in 2016. Duterte told the public if oh yeah in 2016. So the Philippines war on drugs has created the belief that extrajudicial violence and murder are necessary to fight crime, but the Human Rights Watch has torn the narrative to fight crime, but the Human Rights Watch has torn the narrative around the Duterte. They are publicizing information about the vigilante justice in the Philippines. So there are a lot of gunmen have killed 7,000 known drug dealers. So because of they earn money, they force her her or himself to join as a vigilant to kill drug killers for in the for seek their self. So the fifth or the last is the corruption. So the public learned a former mayor may have been released from prisons for rape and homicide in 1993. In September 2018, the public learned that um, that a woman was told her husband's sentence would be uh, uh, shortened if she paid 50,000 pesos. And later the years, senators stated that inmates could live like king for a fee. This information led to further allegation. Prisons workers and officials were taking bribes to bring and distribute contraband to inmates. So, the contraband in questions include cigarettes, cell phones, televisions. Supposedly, inmates can also pay for personal cooks and nurses. Inmates who cannot afford a better life within the prisons are stuck in overcrowded and dirty rooms. These inmates have a higher rate of becoming ill and of death. Now the corruption has been unearthed. Officials are taking steps to weed it out, one prison at a time. So, the corruption is everywhere. Way back on the this. So in the September 2018, so he learned that their husband is sentenced. So in order to shorten year of their husband, she only pay for 50,000 for to shorten their sentence. And if just like for example, if the poor cannot pay for the sentence, if he or she not if he or she not have any money, he can shorten their sentence or not. That's very unfair. So because of the rich can when I said earlier that the rich is can hire a cookers, the doctors in sake for their sale to be safe, and because someone is the poor is where he joined to the overcrowded and dirty rooms in jail because he or she had no money to pay or to shorten their sentence. So the every year the global prisons trends by penal reform international provide us with a global view and on the state of prison. So every year this um, this report is unfortunately hardly a surprise. We read about the degrading conditions in which people are imprisoned and about their growing number. So, yet, the level of crime in most society is constantly decreasing. The question is that remains answered. Therefore, is why our societies focus their response to unlawful behaviors so often on the prison. Where is the proportionality in sentencing when we punish the non-violent offenses with lengthy persons sentences? It is or is this the only response we can offer? So, in this chapter on drugs and imprisonment, in these reports highlights that a high number of prisons in the world are overcrowded due to the incarcerations of people for drug-related offenses, in the particular non-violent offenses involving use and possessions for personal use. This directly reflects our contemporary addictions to punishment and showcases and disproportionality of punishment and relation to the offense. So, the use of harsh prison sentence for people who use the harsh prison sentences for people who are used or for those who play a minor role in the drug trade also shows the inefficiency, limitations, and preserves effects of current drug control. Not only the punishments and incarceration become the sole instrument used to enforce the law, but they are serving to implement moral norms which have no link with reality for offense that they have supposed to punish. So, these trends are often incarcerated and punished. So, this directly reflects our contemporary addictions to punish and showcases this proportionality of punish in the relations to offense. And the use of uh, harsh prison, the sentences for people who use a harsh prison, sentences for people who use drugs, or for those who play a minor role in the drug trade also shows the efficiency, limitations, and preserved effects of current drug control. So, the use of harsh prison sentences for people who use a harsh prisons, sentences for people who use drugs, or for those who play a minor role in drug trade also shows the efficiency, limitations, and preserved effects of current drug control. So that is the why the criminal prisons this will happen because they commit play minor to use or to deal dealers drugs to other country or to other people. Not only to not only are punished and incarcerations become the sole instruments used to enforce the law, but also they are serving to implement moral norms which have no link with the reality of offense that they have supposed to punish. These trends, so is supposed to be to punish. So the deep impact, it has no prison system and own people in prison system and own people in prisons and their communities has sparked the current global debate on policy system. So the countries traditionally adopted um, the harsh stances on drugs, such as the Malaysia, where uh, where also and Iran are reviewing the death penalty for drug offenses and removing people death death now. So the Philippines or is different from Malaysia and Iran. Why? Because the Philippines, if they arrest the drug dealers or the drug addicts are can prison or a prison of life sentences, but the other country is the people who use the drug or the dealers of drug can be their punish is a death penalty. So they are or therefore born out of the real need, the need of societies to stop exposing their citizens to greater risk from arrest related to drug use than come from the act of using drugs. So, in 2016, the need for reforms was also highlighted at the UN General Assembly Association or Session on Drugs, held on 2016. In their decision, their member state called for proportionate the sentencing and for the alternatives and incarceration. At the Global Commission, the drug policy we call for these commitments to be implemented, taking account of fact that over the incarcerations as result of out-to-date drugs, policy stalls progress on implementing the sustainable development of goals. So we need to accept the behaviors and actions of others that are not aligned that our own moral perspective do not need to be turned into criminal offenses. So the second, we need to introduce proponent sentencing an alternative to imprisonment for minor drug supplement offenses. So, by the Nelson's Mandela rules, to play the rehabilitative rule and focuses on social reintegration and to distance from the criminal justice system those who should not be subject to it, including the people who use drugs. So the to antiquity to modernity. So the first millennia before Christ, uh, is the earliest records of the prison. So the millennia BC is the earliest records of prisons located in the areas where the civilizations of Mesopotamia and Egypt. So millennia, um, they will happen that they will crime committed on this country before Christ, and the Greece exemptions from the rules comes from the home of modern democracy. There are the prisons were held in the poor isolated buildings where they could often be visited by their friends and family. So the prisoners were held in the poor isolated buildings because of they have no money to to um, to pay to pay, and that's why where they often to visited by friends and family. So the primary source of their detentions were not dungeons, high walls, or bars, but simple wooden blocks that are attached on their feet. So the ancient Roman Empire. So they continued to use harsher methods. So the prisoners themselves were held either in simple cells or chained to the walls for life or for time. They were not sentenced to death, were sold as slaves or used by them as gladiators. So the Roman Empire is a very harsher to the criminal offender. For now, the criminal offender were arrested and they sentenced for life sentence. And before, way back to the ancient Roman Empire, the ancient Roman Empire is not a sentence to death, but they sold to be as slaves in order not totally slaves, just like a just like our maid, but the slave is just like a warriors. So they sold him or her to be their gladiators in order to be fighting each other. So There are many slaves were tasked as a glacier. They can battle in the battleground in mighty Colosseum arena. So the slaves are very uh, the, s- so the slaves are very strong to battle one on one um, to the other. So in the European, the the prisons remain harsh until English so the slaves are very strong in order to fight in the battleground where the others are be ready to fight in the mighty Colosseum arena. So the European was the imprisons remain harsh until the English royalty started being more involved with their justice system. So oh so the European is started being involved in their so they can evolve or involve in the justice, not the in the ancient times that their criminal prisoners were be as slaves. So in 1166, Henry II commissioned the constructions of first prison. The first draft of English legal system that used concept of jury. In 1215, one of the most historic prisons legislation, King John signed a Magna Carta which stated that no man could be imprisoned without that. In the 16th and 18th century, the English prisons become overcrowded. So this is the beginning where the prisons became overcrowded. So and a new penal measures started being implemented. So this is the beginning in the why the prisons overcrowded in the jail in the 16th and 18th century. So in the military pardon and the penal transportation. So at the end of the 18th century, over 50,000 prisoners were transported from England to penal colonies in North Korea and Austria. So the 50,000 prisoners of the England transported the 18th century, the 50,000 prisoners were transported from England to colonies from in the North America or and Australia. And the 19th century, the age of modern prisons that we know today started with the several prisons reforms. Started the time the prisons was receiving more care, concept of rehabilitation. So in the military pardon and penal transportation, the end of the 18th century, over 50,000 prisoners were transported from England to penal colonies in North America and Australia. And the 19th century, the age of modern prisons that we know today started with the several prisons reform. Started Ayan. Military pardon and penal transportation. The end of the 18th century, over 50,000 prisoners were transported from England to penal colonies in North America and Australia. So the next is the 19th century. So the age of the modern prisons that we know today started with the several prisons reforms. Started the time the prisons was receiving more care. Concept of rehabilitation was introduced and government around the world, especially in UK and US. So started reconsidering knows their views on solitary confinement. So this is the beginning of the 20th century. So brought the formation is large amount of wars, prisons camps and concentration camps. Most famous examples of those or the types of the prisons happens during the World War II, when Nazi government formed over 300 detentions centered in which political opponents, Jews, gypsies, criminals, and others were detained without judicial process. So, wars are engulfed the world, brought the information of large amounts of wars, in prisons or prison camps and concentrating camps. So these types of prisons happen during the World War II. So this is the Nazi government formed the 300 detentions centered in which political opponents, Jews, gypsies, criminal, and others were detained without judicial process. So in the middle of the 20th century, the France even continued their practice, their penal colonies. The most notably in French Guiana and its infamous prisons Devil's Islands. Russia also used removed penal colonies in the frozen north as Siberia. And at the end of the 20th century, the modern prison system was finalized. So this is that's why in the end of 20th century, they changed into the modern prison system that before the prisons are to be as slaves, and the prison on the certain country can transported into any country. That's why at the end of the century, 20th century, the modern prison system was finalized. So the 1991 concept of probation service was introduced, and 3 years before, the first prisons intended solely for the holding of inmates in permanent isolation was formed. So in the 2005, those Supermax prisons became widespread actors or actus the entire United States, over 40 of them being active. So, in 2006, it is estimated that over 9 million periods are imposed worldwide, with United States leading in the rate of incarceration. So, uh, the the so in the 2006 estimated that over 9 million period is imposed worldwide, with United States leading in the rate of incarceration. So in the 2006, the in the worldwide, the United States is leading the rate of incarceration. So this certain community, just like the United States, there are a lot of the crimes happening where they have a theft, murder, and usually drugs and others. So we discuss about the lesson 3, morals and religious influence. So, influence of religion and morality on criminal justice has been of major importance throughout the history. Morality is common part of religious belief, and primary rule of religion is to exert control over its followers by the setting and promoting rule and custom for the people follow. So the influence religions. So the religions can influence and the morality of the justice, criminal justice, for the major of importance of the history. So in the 70th and 80th, the role of the religious is defining the crimes in American colonial society. Was clear crime included blasphemy, sexual deviance, and heresy. So these shames and guilt were supposed to be the offender apologized, asked forgiveness, and live a better life. So in the medieval times, the Roman Catholic introduced the incarcerations or confinement in a person's as alternative to death. So that's why the Roman Catholic introduced the incarceration or confinement in a person's as an alternative to death. Because as we all know, life is one. Life give to our the begetting, the only begat the to our God. So in order to stop the killing, so the one solution, in order to control the killings, are to be incarceration or to arrest the criminals to the prisons. The idea spread as Protestant in Northern Europe established corrections facilities in the late 16th century. So in the 1903, the idea spread. So the Catholics under the Pope built the Michael prisons of youth offenders, separating them from adults and providing work for rehabilitation. The prisons of Britain was expansion. So in the 1733, the Britain had assigned chaplains to all prisons. So the Catholic Church is the largest group of Christian in the world. Yes, that is true. Because there are a lot of people are being a religious. So they have above 1 billion members. Whoa, there are a lot of members are where the Catholic Church people, mostly in the Europe, North and South America. Well, the Europe and the America were a lot of members. So the Roman Catholics believe that Jesus Christ is the Son of God and that he rose to heaven after being crucified. Yes, that is true. So the Pope is leader of the Roman Catholic Church of successor of Jesus Christ on earth. Has influenced his history more than any other organization. So the Pope is the leader of Roman Catholic Church and successor of Jesus Christ on earth, and has influenced history more than any other organization. So the missionaries traveled to the other continents to spread the Catholicism. So that's why there are a lot of foreigner or the other person where live in the other country, and the Roman Catholic Church was the most powerful organization in Western Europe. So the Roman Catholic was the most powerful of any church because they have a lot of members within this church in Western Europe. It's not only a religious power, but also gain more and more political power. So, for in the gibot man mo G. So it's not only a religious power, but also gain more and more political power. So for the other countries, they know that it's not only a religious power, but more and more political power because they need political power, but from other church churches, but some of them churches are not gain a more political power, but only a religious power, because the religious power can help our self or our inner spirit to connect to our God. So the on for the Roman in the Western Europe. So in the 14th century, the cardinals elected a French people who did not want to go to Rome for about 70 years, were two two popes who fought for power, one Avignon and one in Rome. So in the 14th century, so there are a lot of cardinals were elected. So uh, so they can elect cardinals in order to lead their lead the vegan on and who lead in the rule. Throughout the long history of corrections, religious persons and religious institutions have greatly influenced the treatment of offenders. Establishments of persons and penit- penitentiaries was a religious idea that allowed the offender to obtain penance for his crimes, make amends, convert while being isolated from others. Corrections compliance were among the earliest paid non-custodial staff, and were the first to provide education and counseling for inmates. So the corrections compliance were among the earliest paid non-custodial. So where they were provide educational and counseling for the inmates to in order to learn of um, what will happen, what on what they are wrong doing. To the one in the three inmate participate in some religious program during their incarceration. So yes, someone inmates cannot join the program just like a religious or religious and education, because I don't know, but some of them are being excited to join because they wants to learn more about the to be improve themselves, and the influence and the practice of religions is the correctional settings is the old or is as old as the history of prison. So initially entry of religions into prisons was probably carried out by religious men who themselves were imprisoned. Imprisonment under church jurisdiction became substitute for corporal or capital punishment. So we have in the um, we in we s- so we discuss in the module no so we discussed the lesson 4 where the Saint John Paul II or Jonas Paulus. So he was born in Wadowice, Poland, that was born on May 18, 1960, and died on April 2, 2005 in Vatican City. So Pope John Paul is the promote greater understanding between nations and between the religious. He undertook numerous trips abroad. So Pope John Paul traveling for the greater distances from or than had all other popes combined, and he extended his influence behind the church by complaining against political opposition and criticizing the materialisms of the West. So in the May 13, 1981, so the Pope John Paul II was cruising the St. Peter Square in Vatican City when an attempt was made on his life. So met Ali Agca, who had escaped from Turkish prisons after receiving a life sentence for murdering a journalist fired 4 shots with a 9 millimeter pistol. So we back on the May 13, 1981 for the Pope John Paul II, because Pope John Paul II was shot of his um, member member so he 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 the so May 13, 1981, Pope John Paul II was crossing the St. Peter Square in Vatican City when an attempt was made on his life. So meet me Ali Agca, who had escaped from a Turkish prison after receiving a life sentence for murdering a journalist fired 4 shots with a 9 millimeter pistol. 2 stacks of the Pope is in his lower intestine, 1 in his right arm and 1 in his left index finger. 2 bystanders were also wounded. Despite severe blood loss, the pontiff survived and asked for all Catholics to pray for Agca, whom he had century for forgiven. So in the 1983, Pope John Paul II visited his would-be assassins. They had a private conversation and emerged as friends. And the 2016, the request was granted. Agca was released and devoted to Turkey, where he was imprisoned for the life sentence he had fied decades prior. So he convicted the constantly were incarceration and was finally released in 2016. So Pope John Paul II homily the prisoners appears before us who are gathered here. He is asking to be found in you and in so many other people touched by various forms of human suffering. So this word contain, he would say, the program of the Jollibee in prison, which we have a celebration today, to invite us to live them as a commitment to the dignity of all people, that dignity which focus from God's love for every human person. So the lesson 5, which is the Walnut Street Prison. So was a city, jail, and penitentiary house in the Philadelphia, Pennsylvania from 1773 to 1838. Legislations calling for establishment of jail was passed in 1773 to relieve overcrowding in the High Street jail. The first prisoner was admitted in 1776. So, in penitentiary house built in 1790 is considered to be the first in the United States as it was built to use individual cells and work details. This was made new and permanent from the combating crime through the practice of solitary confinement, which was later adopted at the Eastern State Penitentiary. So, Sir Robert Smith, the jail was designed to hold groups of inmates in large rooms. So there was a little regard for their physical well-being and none for their rehabilitation. The prisons was overcrowded and dirty, and inmates attacked each other regularly. A new cell block called the Penitentiary House was added in 1973. The cells and the corridors connecting them were arranged to the preventing prisoners to communicating with each other. As a penitentiary, solitary confinement was goal, but such policies were available for about of theory of those admitted. So, the Walnut Jail or a street jail was to be convicted into a penitentiary in 1790. Was establishment in 1773 is considered to be the very first prisons in America, and was soon followed by the Newgate in New York in 1997. Newgate was established as a result of efforts by such social reformers as Thomas Eddy to make the criminal justice system of their day more human. So, they reduced significantly the number of crimes requiring capital punishment upon conviction. So, Instead of death sentence or crippling corporal punishment, they substitute lengthy prison sentences that meant building facilities to house the felon who, under prior laws, would have been executed for Maine. So, lastly, the lesson 6, King Henry the Eighth and King Edward VI, a jewel of King Henry VIII. So, the Bridewell Palace in London was built as residence of King Henry VIII and was one of his home. So, in his reign for 8 years, the King Henry VIII was the King of England from 1509 until his death in 1547. He is the best known for his 6 marriages, and in particular his efforts to have his first marriage to Catherine of Aragon annual given to the City of London Corporation by his son King Edward VI for use as the orphanage and place of corrections for wayward women. So King Edward VI was the king of the England and Ireland from 28 January 1547 until his death in 1553. He was crowned on February 20 at the age of the 9. So King Edward was the son of Henry VIII and Jane Seymour, an England's first monarch to be raised as Protestant. So during the reign of William was governed by a regency council because he never reached maturity. Bridewell later became the first prison's poorhouse to have an appointed doctor. So, the Bridewell later became the first prison's poorhouse to have an appointed doctor. So there was a build on the banks where or the flat of river in the city of London, between the Fleet Street and River Thames in the area today known as the Bridewell Palace of New Bridge Street. So the Fleet River. So the Fleet River is the largest of London's subterranean rivers, all of which today contains Fall River for treatment. Is a major street mostly in the city of London. It's run west to east from Temple Bar at the boundary with the city of Westminster, of Ludgate Circus at the site of the London Wall, and the River Fleet from which the street was named. So the Temple Bar was the principal ceremonial entrance to the city of London from the city of Westminster. So, Loch Gantry Circus is the road junctions is in the city of London where the Farringdon Street Lodgegate Hill or um, the Lodgegate Hill is a gentle rise to St. Paul's Cathedral. By 1556, part of it had become a jail known as Bridewell Prison. It was reinvented with lodgings demolished in 1863 to 1864. The name of Bridewell subsequently became a common name for a jails used not only in England but in other English-speaking cities include Dublin, Chicago, and New York. So thank you. That's all my presentation. Hope you have earned knowledge for my discussion. Thank you.